in effect, carried out a citizen's arrest on someone who's eventually committed a murder?
I'd like to answer your question, but I think the issue for us is we're knowledgeable about this particular case. So it's not really, I'm really outside my frame of reference to speak about another case at this news conference.
So others might want to ask questions. We'll want to ask questions.
Yeah.
So.
Can I ask why you think the Toronto Police and the Coroner's Office closed this case so quickly? Why did they do this? Was this incompetence, or was there a reason behind it? Why?
You know, I can just tell you the events that occurred very rapidly on the day of December the 9th. For me, explaining as to why a particular person would act that way, we don't have any background with respect. I don't have any history with the Toronto Police Service. I don't know any of the officers, and certainly didn't know any of the coroners prior to John's death. It was a very strange day on December the 9th. It seemed to be, everything was unusual. Nothing seemed to follow in a pattern that you would think logically would occur. You're told your son's dead. You're told don't come to Toronto. You know, we don't want to see you. We showed up at the police department. They didn't even really accommodate us. They didn't want to take us to the morgue. We got to the morgue. They wouldn't let us see our son. We said, no, we're not watching John on video. We're really here to see if there's any suspicious injuries on John. There was a confrontation at the morgue. They wouldn't let us see John. When we did see John, Gloria and I are standing there with a morgue attendant, almost got him by the scruff of the neck, saying, do you see that injury, that head wound injury there? That injury didn't occur from the fall because John was found flat on his back, face up, wearing a toque. Now, we want an autopsy with that relative to that injury. Do you understand that? We're saying this to the morgue attendant. You know, to end, and then the next day we called the coroner's office, and the coroner's office has been given a very similar scenario. The next day we saw the police officer. He got the same scenario. Sarah's described some of that. So to ask me what they were thinking at that time, I mean, why would you send an investigating officer on holidays? And the point is, as soon as anything became suspicious here, the cause of John's death had to immediately switch to undetermined. It had to switch to undetermined. It could have been switched to undetermined at any one of maybe 20 times in the last 8 years. There was so much information available.
Sarah, can I ask you, just even your own thoughts, why do you think they botched this investigation?
I wish I knew. I really don't know why. I said it in my speech, and I'll say it again. It was my belief and understanding that they would investigate. I never spoke up regarding the autopsy. When we requested an autopsy in the first meeting that we had with Detective Fargy, it was my understanding that when a family makes a request to have an autopsy done, that it be performed. I've worked in the hospital. I was a vascular surgery pharmacist, and we always had the opposite problem when somebody died, was getting the family to agree to an autopsy to ensure that we knew the correct cause of death. To be honest with you, I'm shocked, and I don't understand why. I really don't. I don't know why they wouldn't do that. And I don't understand why they're still hesitant and unwilling to conduct an investigation. It doesn't make sense.
Mr. Runciman, can I ask you this? You're probably the best known proponent of law and order in Ontario. You have been Minister in Justice posts, and you're also known probably as one who very much supports the police. I'm not criticising that, although I've known cases where you haven't, and I can remember them. But in essence, well, one of the charges here is that the police have made a very shoddy inquiry, a very inadequate inquiry. And do you believe that? And is it painful for you to say that as someone who is a...
Police are human, and mistakes can be made. I think that Scott Newark, and I'm not sure, John, if we provided the letter that Scott Newark sent to Julian Fantino, but he went over a sort of a catalog of missteps and errors, in his view, as a former Crown attorney, that were made, and not in an accusatory way, simply that these are things that should have been done and weren't done. And who knows, in terms of why these things happen. It could be caseload, it could be a whole range of areas. Who knows, an officer's own personal life. Who knows what's going on in terms of why these things sometimes occur. Sometimes they occur in terms of wrongful convictions, and sometimes they could occur in a situation like this where there wasn't an appropriate investigation conducted. And certainly on the Connely family, but they obviously have an emotional issue to deal with here as well. And I look at Scott Newark, and Scott Newark, if you set that aside from the involvement of the family, this is a professional who spent his life in the justice system in a variety of roles. He's concluded that the investigation was flawed, and you know, who can say why it was flawed in terms of the individual officer or the support of his superiors subsequent to that in not reopening the investigation?
Would you agree that there are many cases in which police investigations are flawed? And you mentioned wrongful convictions, and there are many of them, including quite a number in Ontario for murder. Every so often somebody's being released after years in jail, being found not guilty. There are policemen constantly being found guilty of offences, offences in court, from drunk driving to other offences, and there are many circumstances in which policemen have to be viewed with, and the reports have to be viewed with more suspicion. I think you said you have a profound respect for the law, but I'm not sure if you would if you looked at all these cases which come before the courts, of which the province keeps no record, involving policemen, police wrongdoing.
No, I think the average person in Ontario actually, and I'm speaking mostly for our family, but I know that we've got a relatively large social network. The average person in Ontario really has very little to do with police officers or coroners on a day-to-day basis. We don't really come into contact with police officers on a day-to-day basis. So in my day-to-day life, I would regard police officers and coroners as someone who is actually going to be helpful to us. So that's the framework that I grew up in. It's the framework that Sarah and John grew up in, and it's the framework that our families lived in. And I don't think that's a lot different than any average Canadian family living in Ontario today.
But you're talking about the average police officer. And that's
I have to think that the average. I have to think that the average police officer. I'd have to think that the average police officer actually does care and actually does do their job. Obviously, in this case, the people who were involved in this investigation did not do their jobs correctly, and their superiors were not willing to look into the irregularities that existed. And that's it in a nutshell, so to speak. I'm not here to beat up some people. I can just tell you what took place during this investigation, and what took place during this investigation breached the laws of the province. That's really where it is.
Did you take any kind of a private investigation? Like, did you hire a private investigator to look into this? I mean, do you, can you sort of explain?
We hired probably the best people, and we had guidance from some of the best people we could possibly contact. Very early in the investigation, we used Dr. Baden from New York, who's written a book on suspicious death, and we were in phone conversation with him. We were in contact with Henry Lee, is it Gloria? Dr. Henry Lee from the United States. So both these people are in the United States, and believe it or not, they're high-profile individuals, these people. And the surprising thing about this was they were returning our phone calls when we couldn't get a phone call returned from the Ontario Coroner's Office. So that's where it started. And then, of course, we hired Dr. Frederick Jaffe, and just as a note, and condolences to Dr. Frederick Jaffe's family. Dr. Frederick Jaffe was a forensic pathologist in Ontario for, I believe, about 50 years, and he just passed away last week. So Dr. Jaffe was one of the very few forensically trained pathologists in Ontario at the time. And it was Dr. Jaffe who, we took the photographs to him, the autopsy photographs, and we asked him to review the case. And what was significant was not only that Dr. Jaffe reviewed the case, but Dr. Jaffe took us aside and he said to us, I don't know what you're going to do here, but he said, the coroner's office is not functioning the way it should. He said they're breaking all the rules and regulations of how a sudden suspicious death should be investigated.